Hola. ¿Todo bien? Okay, that will be all the Spanish for now. I will be talking about one of the sexiest topics we have in SAP, finance, taxes. That is really one of the best topics because basically all companies implementing SAP, they have to implement finance. So that's one of the best areas to work for. And I have chosen the longest title I could think of for the presentation. Move to S/4HANA globally and stay compliant with local legal reports using SAP Advanced Compliance Reports. Ooh, I have to breathe a bit after that. Yeah, I couldn't even remember the whole title. I had to read it a bit. But the idea here is that SAP is complex to implement. Legal reporting is complex. So I cannot have a simple title. That wouldn't fit the presentation. For the next, I don't know, 28 minutes, 27 now, I will talk about three main things. I'll talk a bit about S/4HANA. Alex already talked a lot about moving to S/4HANA, moving to new things, and implementing new things on SAP. But I will focus on a very detailed thing, finance, taxes. What is important about a global rollout? Companies, they plan and they implement, they try the same process everywhere in the world. And when we think about production, for example, for production, companies, they can more or less implement their global template anywhere. Because when they have a production order in the factory, it works more or less the same in Turkey, in Argentina, in China, with very small differences. They don't have what is called localization. Localization is what makes finance special. When we think about how companies post their accounting documents, that changes in every country. Because you have different tax laws, you have different tax codes, tax rates. The taxes that are due in a certain operation are different. So localization is really a key thing for finance. So when the companies, they design a global template to implement in SAP, that is the first area when they do the rollout, they see roadblocks. Because they make a global template and they think, okay, it's 100% user-proof. We will not have any problem. First country they go to implement, when they go to finance, okay, now we have a new requirement. Nobody thought about that. We interviewed all users from all countries, but that didn't come before. It came now when we do the rollout. So it always happens in the area of finance. And in the past, it was quite complicated in SAP. It was not so easy to implement finance and to deliver legal reports. And that is one of the reasons why SAP developed ACR, Advanced Compliance Reports, to make it easier and to make it more standardized, because there was no standardized approach before. So the idea of SAP ACR is to have a global cockpit, a global interface, and global processes that global IT can work with and can understand, that is easier to roll out to different countries. That is the main idea of SAP ACR. And before I go to the system or to the details of the system, I still have to think and talk about one thing. How these challenges in the area of finance evolved over time. So in the past, the governments, they wanted some information from the companies. They had paper forms. So companies were filling paper forms, sending it by mail to government. It still happens today in Germany. And governments saw, okay, this paper form is complicated to process. It has lots of manual work from us. So they started to ask for electronic files. So they had text files. And it happened around the world. Several different governments have several different text formats to inform taxes, invoices, or accounting details. It all evolved and evolved really quick. We went to online forms. We started with the electronic invoices. First electronic invoices, they were basically files that you could upload in the government portal. It evolved to a submission via web service with electronic authorization. Now the goods cannot leave the company if the government doesn't say you are allowed to do it. And then governments got different accounting standards, accounting legal formats in every country. So you have to inform everything that happens in the company, and they have to audit you remotely, and they fine you remotely because they now know everything you do. So we evolved from this E thing e-invoice, e-accounting to everything. The government wants everything. They want to know every operation the company does and how they do that and what is the result, and most important thing, if the taxes are collected at the end of the process. So that's the background of e-compliance, e-invoice, and e-reporting. And this slide is really ugly, but that's exactly how it is. Ugly is the word to define the legal reporting in SAP, because we have 200, 300, 500 reports, different transaction codes. We had different configurations, different flags. Everything is really confusing. They all look the same, but they have different meanings. We have the same word, the same icon in SAP representing different things in different reports. And that's exactly how legal reporting in the ECC world is today. We usually in the presentations, like marketing presentations, we say, in the past ECC was like that. No, ECC is like that today, 2021. It's not better. And this really presented a big challenge for companies, because when you are rolling out a global template and you go talk to the users in Argentina, they say, I have this report, Libro IVA Digital, I have this report, SIT Buenos Aires report, and then Global IT, okay, never heard about it, let's Google it, let's check SAP help, what is it about? And they start then to look for the transactions, and that happens in a global scale. So every country the company goes to, they talk to the end users, okay, we have different legal reports, different formats, different transactions we need to map, provide authorizations and everything. And these reports in ECC, they have specific characteristics. Basically, they are not process-based. So the users, they go there, they run it, they generate an output, and that's it. But if I am a compliance manager or a tax manager, I don't know when was executed, when the report is due, when was the report delivered, where the file is stored. That it doesn't happen in the system. That is outside. So we manage it in Excel or in network folders or whatever else, but not in SAP. And that poses also a threat to companies, because they can have compliance exposure if they don't find a file during an audit, or if the file is manually modified after it's generated and then nobody knows where is the original file. So these things are complicated if you're a tax manager. But it is a challenge today in SAP. That's the SAC legal reporting. SAP has a very nice slide to represent more or less what I explained. So that ugly slide is more or less the same thing represented very well by SAP here, saying we have thousands of legal reports, we have manual processes, we have manual steps done by accountants in the end of the process. We have to extract data from SAP to sources outside SAP to do legal reporting. That is SAP representing how it is in ECC. So even SAP knows it doesn't look so good in ECC. But the thing is, they really thought about it, and they redesigned legal reporting for S/4HANA. I'm not here to advertise SAP, but I have to say, ACR is really good, and it works really well. And I will talk now a bit about what they redesigned and what is included in it. When we talk about this S/4HANA ACR, the official name, I don't remember. I think it's SAP Solutions for Advanced Accounting Reporting. It's really complicated with the naming. It will always change in the end. But what is included in it? And it's important to mention. S/4HANA ACR contains the legal reports, VAT, withholding tax, financial statements, additional reports, and it is centralized. We have a cockpit where the users can go there and see all the reports for all countries in the same app. So they followed a kind of Lord of the Rings approach. It's one app to rule them all. Now the users, they have one app to get all their legal reports. And if I'm a global process manager or a compliance manager, I know where to find the files and I know where to find the details, because it's one app. It's not 200 different transactions that I don't have access in the production system. Another thing SAP redesigned is how data extraction works. Data extraction was really complicated in the past. These reports, they worked with more or less the same data, finance. So we had the company code, we had BKPF and BSEG, the accounting document tables, and we had BSET, the tax table for accounting data. But the way the reports read the data was always different. If I had the report for Mexico or I used the report for Germany or Argentina, they had different logic to access the same data. It was not standardized. And that was because it was developed by different teams in SAP over different periods of time using different technologies. That always happened. But now with ACR, we have more standardized process because we have more CDS views with standardized data access. We also have standardized BRF plus functions to read and to access data. So the data extraction became much better. And SAP turned also the generation of the reports into a process-based thing, which is very nice. So now I know when the report was executed, first and last, or every time it was executed. I have logs about that. I know if the accountants, they changed the file manually and submitted a different version of the file for the government. If they do that, they can upload the file into ACR and store the actual delivered file for the government. So it's really nice. And SAP also developed it as a framework. Originally, ACR was called a Statutory Reporting Framework. It was not ACR. And actually, it is really a framework. You have options to enhance, extend, and develop using the apps provided by SAP, and they are easy to consume, like a framework should be. And that makes our work as partners much better, because now we don't need to debug the programs or check the actual code to reverse engineer and do enhancements. No, we can see the definitions and we can make new definitions on top of that. That makes the implementation process more standardized and easier for consultants as well. SAP already provides some analytics for some of the reports. That is an area that is being improved. It's just some of the reports have analytics, but since most of the reports have CDS views, it's now also easier to build and consume this data in analytical models. And data is auditable. So SAP already generates logs, and you can see which documents were selected in a specific report execution, or if the accountants manually removed a certain document from the report. So it's easier to see where the problems are happening and where the company has to act in the next months to avoid problems in the legal reporting. So these are functionalities SAP included in ACR based on what they learned over 30 years of implementing different legal reports in dozens of countries. I will show a bit some of the functionalities of ACR. The product itself is really big. If you want to learn it, it's a workshop for a week. But I will show some of the things I think are the most important. First, so that 200 reports, they became 2 apps. One app for IT, that is the defined compliance reports, where I have all the report definitions, and one app for the actual users of the system, the run compliance reports. So here we already have a big benefit. It's not just because it's Fiori, but because it's really a central cockpit. In the IT view, if I am a functional consultant, global IT member, I have this defined compliance reports app. There I have the report categories. The report category is what kind of report I am providing. For example, if I think about Germany, one report category is VAT for Germany. And this report category supports one thing that is interesting, multiple report versions. Because if the government changes the layout from 2020 to 2021, I have now the definition for both reports in the system. If I need to rectify data from the past, I can use the past layout. In the past, in some reports, that was a problem. Government wanted rectification from 2 years ago, but we had implemented notes, and now the report would not match anymore. So that is a problem solved with these different report versions. And another thing that is pretty interesting, SAP developed a kind of wizard with 7 steps to create a report. What is the idea behind of this wizard? Everything I need to create a report or to define what is included in the report is in this wizard. So I know from the wizard what are the selection parameters for the screen of the report. What is important to be considered? Company code, business place, section code, or additional details. I have the query definition. That is another functionality very interesting. So now I know the data sources for the report. I don't need to open SIT, open the program, and look for the tables that are used. Now it's already declared as a data source. And data sources can be really modern data sources like CDS views or HANA calculation views, but also GRF plus functions or traditional ABAP classes and methods. It's really interesting to see that already from the beginning of the report definition. I don't need to go to coding and debugging to reverse engineer. SAP already gives me the information from the beginning. That's pretty good. Also, I can have correspondence. I can create forms easily, integrate forms into the reports. Yeah, in some countries, like US, for example, we have reports that are delivered in PDF for the government. So they already support that integrated to the framework. Or if I want to create a form, let's say withholding tax in several countries, it's normal to provide withholding tax certificates to vendors that can be already created and integrated into the framework. And also they have a default item log, and where I can see which documents were selected or not, and it's stored in the database. So I always know what documents are taken into consideration to a certain report. And I skipped one thing, because one thing I want to go into detail, the mapping. As a consultant, I almost cried when I saw the mapping, because now it is really easy. In the past, this was always hours of work, of debugging, checking the code, and see where data is coming from. And now SAP has a functionality that shows me where is the data source, and from which field of the data source I am getting the final output of the report. So that functionality is really good for consultants and makes it easy to extend reports or even create new reports, because now it really doesn't require go actually coding there, but you can do that from a wizard point of view. That's much easier and works really well. I created a report with around 10 to 15 minutes after I learned a bit how it works, and I created the report with 10 to 15 minutes. If I think about ABAP coding, that was not possible. In the past, the simplest report I would create would take 1 to 2 hours minimum until it worked and compiles and everything. So that was really one of the best functionalities I have seen for consultants. But SAP is not a system for the consultants, it's a system for the companies. So we have benefits also for the users. When we talk about the run reports, that is the app used by the end users, accountants, it is now process-based. So I can see where is the process in the month. I can see the due date of a report. I can see how many activities were already executed for the report. So that really gives a very good overview for a tax manager of where the team is working, what are the problems, or are my reports already delivered or overdue, without sending emails out to the team. That is a very good functionality. And one thing SAP included is what they call activities. So from the perspective of the process before in ECC, we only had report execution. It was always report execution. What happens before that, I don't know. That's not designed in the system. But now with reporting activities, I know, oh, I still have to check my open items and see if they have to be reported this month. I have to run the report. After that, I have to post a tax payable because I owe money to the government. That is in a process view now. And these report activities can be customized. You can add more reporting activities according to your process. So if you have additional steps, you can include them here and make them visible in the process flow. That is very interesting. Also, for the managers, it's very interesting to know when the reports are executed and when they are delivered. And that is really clear from the system. So if check that the report is due and, okay, who is working on this? You can go there and you can see, this report was already executed by my team 10 times this month. Well, maybe we have a problem here because that's not so normal. Or they are working on something because data from the accounting documents is not correct at this point. Or they are having problems to integrate into sending the files to the government. There is something wrong, but you can check and you can see that in the system. So the report runs, they store also the files in the server. So I can see what are the files they created, and I can also compare the files and see what was different between one run and the other. That is really good. And SAP also provided embedded analytics. So there is a very small icon there, and for some reports I already have the analytics. That's usually the first thing the accountants ask me when we are doing legal reporting. Okay, we generate this report with 1,000 invoices, the total amount of VAT is 10,000 euro. How do I check this? How do I know if it adds up or not? So that is already in embedded analytics. So you can see the details from the file. You navigate from your actual content to the data that generated that information, and you can compare it. So it's a very nice functionality that works both for managers and for consultants. That is interesting from SAP. But there is always a but. When we talk about S/4HANA, we have different versions. Since, I think, 2016, we have different versions of S/4HANA. And SAP is very good at developing process-based solutions, but there is another thing they are very good at: changing the names of the products. And that happens here. So until 2020, SAP had two solutions. One, advanced compliance reporting, and another solution called document compliance for the electronic documents. That will be talked about later on. And now, with S/4HANA 2021, they are changing a bit the strategy. It makes sense, but they are changing the names of the products. So these two solutions until S/4HANA 2020 will be one solution in S/4HANA 2021. What is the practical difference for the customers now? Basically zero is the name change. But in the future, there will be more changes. They said they are going to change licensing, but that is a commercial topic. I'm really not an expert. I will not comment about licensing. Too complicated. Maybe we can ask somebody from SAP that is in the audience. No, sorry. But that will be one of the main changes right now. Naming convention and licensing. But the idea, and that's important to mention, SAP is changing that because when we think about the compliance topics and challenges of the companies, they are getting more and more together. What is a legal report or a periodic report, and what is an e-document? These lines getting really blurred. Sometimes it's difficult to say, is this scenario e-document, e-reporting, or what? So that's the idea. Here we have more integrated cockpit. SAP already developed a new app for that, where you can see the status, the overall status of the e-documents and the legal reports on the other hand. So the idea is that everything is getting blurred. These lines are getting crossed from each side. So now we have to call it as one app. And the story to sell is also the same story, because in the end, when we get to legal reporting, we already had the documents created for many countries. And they had to comply also with legal formats. So it really makes sense that the product goes to a direction where, okay, everything is deeply connected, and we cannot say anymore sometimes what is reporting, what is e-invoicing. That is something that is going to be released yet. If I'm not mistaken, the S/4HANA 2021 will be released in October 13th. Then we have more information. SAP did a summit a few weeks ago, 1 or 2 weeks ago, and they already showed some of these changes, but it's not yet published as documentation in the help portal because they are waiting it to be together with S/4HANA 2021. Since I talked about S/4HANA, taxes, and ACR, I would also talk about a bit more, patience, I'm almost finishing, about the pain points to implement these kind of things in global systems. Because now S/4HANA ACR, okay, it's a very nice solution, has a lot of new functionalities, support, several business cases, but it still has one challenge. It has to be implemented. And that doesn't happen by accident. That really requires planning from the companies. So think about what global companies have as a challenge. first is the frequency of changes. That is pretty clear. In some countries, things change on a daily basis. I will not talk about Brazil. Yeah, I will not trash talk Brazil. But that also happens sometimes in Mexico and Argentina. Things change. I remember a case in Argentina, the government stopped allowing invoices to be issued in foreign currency from one day to the other. That happened. And if you have contracts with foreign currency, what do? If you have to implement it in the system from one day to the other, you cannot sell in a different currency anymore. So this is a challenge, the frequency of changes. Because here, if you want to implement changes in SAP S/4HANA, you have to think about your maintenance calendar. Can I implement these changes? Do I have a window to put these changes on? Because I cannot plan it in advance. I do not know when the government is going to change something. But that is a challenge for the companies, and that's a big one, because sometimes changes come at very short notice. I have to think about developments, because now the developments I had for old reports, they are really not so used anymore. I have to think about new developments and see how to integrate them into a framework where my global IT can understand what's going on. Because if I follow the old approach and I have different developments, different concepts for every country, in the end, global IT is not able to support it. Global IT will always need somebody else to take care of that. We have to think about process integration, and that's really important, because S/4HANA ACR works really well, but it also builds it on top of scope items of S/4HANA. So it believes that you are implementing the standard process. So when you don't have a standard process, or you have a deviation from the standard process, you also have to take into consideration, okay, how this will be integrated in legal reporting and e-invoicing in the end. Because that is then a big challenge. If I don't have what SAP planned in the original scope item, then I have a customization that will require a lot of effort in the end. I have to include always my professionals in the process of choosing the system, choosing the solutions, and designing and testing it. And that is really important. For companies, sometimes what happens, companies, especially in Europe, they tend to think that IT can check finance stuff, or IT can talk with local IT in the country and they can define finance stuff. But when we talk about Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, these countries are really complicated. If you don't have a legal expert there, the discussion is pointless. IT cannot handle that. So it really requires you to involve the key users and the business users from the units to have the project implemented. Otherwise, you have a set of rules that will be challenged in the first test you do. And then you have to redesign and more effort. And last thing now, S/4HANA ACR is inside S/4HANA. So that is a benefit because you don't need to install another system, but you also need to take into consideration that for sizing of the system and for performance. In some countries, legal reporting is not that complicated, but in countries like Brazil, where you have hundreds of extra tables for legal reporting, data volume can really play a big difference. And you can sometimes have performance issues if it's not well planned in advance. And this was more or less a summary of the challenges we have for implementing S/4HANA ACR in global environments. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and if you have questions, I will be here to answer them if I know the answer.